Hi, guys. This week, our story is called The Garden. It's a part of a bigger book called Frog and Toad Together. If you've ever read the book Frog and Toad Together, you would know that it's a chapter book. And the garden is one of the chapters in the book. This book is a fantasy. Do you remember what a fantasy is? It's a story that could not happen in real life. We know this story is a fantasy because the characters Frog and Toad are animals who act like people. As you're reading this story, I want you to think about the story structure. Story structure is like our five-finger retell. See if you can tell about the characters, setting, beginning, middle, and end of this story when you are done reading it. If not, that's okay. Just go back and read it again. Sorry. Frog was in his garden. Toad came walking by. "What a fine garden you have, Frog," he said. "Yes," said Frog, "it is a very nice, but it is hard work." "I wish I had a garden," said Toad. "Here are some flower seeds. Plant them in the ground," said Frog, "and soon you will have a garden." "How soon?" asked Toad. "Quite soon," said Frog, and Toad ran home. He planted the flower seeds. "Now, seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Let's check in before we turn the page. Can you name the characters in this story? Yes, so far we have met Frog and his friend Toad. Can you think of the setting of this story? The setting is where the story takes place. Right now, they are outside. First, they were in Frog's garden, and then Toad ran home. We can find the words in the text. Frog was in his garden, and Toad ran home. So far, this story has two settings. And since this is the beginning of this story, what has happened so far? So far, Frog gave Toad some seeds to plant. Let's keep reading. Before we turn each page, let's stop and think, what happened on those pages that I just read? Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, now seeds start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start growing. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now seeds start growing." Frog came running up the path. "What is all this noise?" he asked. "My seeds will not grow," said Toad. "You are shouting too much," said Frog. "These poor seeds are afraid to grow." "My seeds are afraid to grow?" asked Toad. "Of course," said Frog. "Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow." That night, Toad looked out of his window. "Drat," said Toad. "My seeds have not started to grow. They must be afraid of the dark." Toad went out to his garden with some candles. "I will read the seeds a story," said Toad. "Then they will not be afraid." Toad read a long story to his seeds. Before we continue reading, let's stop and think. What has happened so far? Well, Frog told Toad that shouting at his seeds would not make them grow. And on this page, Toad is reading a story to his seeds. What do you think the problem in this story is? That's right, Toad's seeds will not grow. And Toad is being very impatient about it. I wonder how Toad will solve this problem. We know he's trying to solve it by shouting and reading them stories. But that hasn't fixed the problem yet. So let's keep reading. All the next day, Toad sang songs to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad read poems to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad played music for his seeds. Toad looked at the ground. The seeds still did not start to grow. "What shall I do?" cried Toad. These must be the most frightened seeds in the whole world. Then Toad felt very tired, and he fell asleep. So on this page, we read that to get his seeds to grow, Toad sang songs, read poems, and played music. Then he fell asleep. "Toad, Toad, wake up," said Frog. "Look at your garden." Toad looked at his garden. Little green plants were coming up out of the ground. "At last," shouted Toad, "my seeds have stopped being afraid to grow. And now you will have a nice garden too," said Frog. "Yes," said Toad, "but you were right, Frog. It was very hard work." In this story, Frog and Toad are the characters. The setting of this story is outside. Most of it is at Toad's house, in his garden. The problem in this story was that Toad's seeds would not grow. He tried a lot of different things to help them, but in the end, his seeds did grow.